Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah, wa ba'd. The next hadith, وعن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم, the messenger of Allah said, وَسِّطُ الْإِمَامِ وَسُدُّ الْخَلَقِ, said make the imam of the prayer in the middle and fill the gaps. Rawahu Abu Dawud. And this hadith is in Abu Dawud. So we've been talking a lot about straightening the lines. We've been talking about making sure the imam is in the middle not by moving him in the middle of prayer, but by making sure that people who line up behind him are going right, one person to the right, one person to the left, one person to the right, one person to the left, so that the imam always remains in the middle when the prayer is being led. Now, the second part we haven't talked very much about is filling the gaps. Filling the gaps for prayer is extremely important. And people fall into one of two extremes on two aspects of filling the gaps. The first extreme is when they're lining up, what are they supposed to do with, when you line up and it says fill the gaps, what does fill the gaps mean? Fill the gap means that if there is a gap between the person next to you, to the right or to the left side of you, from your shoulder to their shoulder, you should fill it. Because if you're not standing directly next to the person, then that means you don't want to be next to them. If you stand up straight with your arms to your sides, the widest part of your normal stance is going to be shoulder to shoulder, your shoulder width. It's how you measure people in terms of like how wide they are. So your shoulder should be next to the shoulder of the other person. Of course, if somebody's much taller than you, somebody's much shorter than you, you're not going to be exactly shoulder to shoulder. But it doesn't mean you have to be squeezing your shoulders. You should there shouldn't be any major gap between your shoulders. Now, some of the common mistakes that people do is what they'll do is when they're lining up for prayer, they will stand like this with their hands like this, and they'll pull their shoulders in. When you pull your shoulders in, and then you stand shoulder to shoulder, and then all of a sudden you start prayer, Allahu Akbar, and then your shoulders come out, each of you banging your shoulders next to each other. Anyone seen this happen? Seen this happen. And then it becomes you're getting squeezed and you're getting squished and you become uncomfortable in prayer. Prayer is not supposed to be uncomfortable to the other person. Also, the second mistake is when it comes to the feet. So when it comes to the feet, there's a range of what's correct and there's a range of what's incorrect. Let me give you the summary. The summary is your feet should never be together. There's a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said, do not put your feet together in prayer. So your feet are not supposed to be standing together. But your feet are not supposed to be so widely spread apart, further than your shoulders. You know why? Because if your feet are further than your shoulders, then you're not going to be able to be shoulder to shoulder with the person who's next to you. And so what happens is some people, they read a hadith and they say, well, I saw a hadith which says that the companions, they lined up feet to feet, they lined up shoulder to shoulder. So what they'll do is if somebody's feet are not at the length of the shoulder, they have a little bit gap between them. So what they'll do is say, well, I need to fill in the gap. So I'm going to fill in the gap with my feet. But if you fill in the gap with your feet to the guy next to you, but you're still not standing shoulder to shoulder, you have not actually done the suddul khalaq. You have not filled in the gaps. So it's important to understand these things. Sometimes people misunderstand what a hadith is saying. We need to make sure we don't fall within this range. There should be a gap between your feet. There should not be too much of a gap. You should be standing shoulder to shoulder, and you should not be squeezing the person next to you. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the correct outward form in our prayer, and give us the correct inward concentration in our prayer. Ameen wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum.